This message comes from BetterHelp. International Women's Day is this March. Time to celebrate all women, the leaders, the caregivers, the hype friends, the how-do-you-do-it-all types. Women deserve to be reminded how much they matter and that therapy offers a space to care for themselves. BetterHelp makes it simple by matching you with a qualified therapist based on your needs and preferences. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR for 10% off.
Who is your best picture pick?
I'm going to go with One Battle After Another. My personal pick would be far different.
Okay, wait. What is it? So this is not your personal deep down in your soul pick?
No. It wasn't nominated. It was Blue Moon.
My heart pick is Sinners. But if I had to choose the best movie on the list, to me, that's The Secret Agent.
Ooh. If I had to choose between One Battle After Another and Sinners, it's actually also for me One Battle After Another. The Academy Awards are this Sunday, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like everyone is anticipating who will win big. There have been so many amazing films in the past year, but if we're being real, it's all boiled down to Sinners versus One Battle After Another. And on its face, it makes sense. Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler, is an original story with vampires, sensuality, and a laser focus on the way whiteness can consume us all. One Battle After Another, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, interrogates revolutionary activism, parenthood, and what it means to save yourself. But what could be a productive conversation about how these films are speaking to this moment in American culture has turned into a contentious online discourse about race, white liberalism, representation in Hollywood, and the industry as a whole.
A lot of this debate actually comes from fans of Sinners feeling the need to defend Sinners as a movie. I think a lot of the defense for One Battle After Another is in response to the defense for Sinners.
Whether you're new to this or have been deep in the discourse, I've got staff writer of culture at Slate, Nadira Goff.
Hey, thanks for having us.
And associate editor at RogerEbert.com, Robert Daniels.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
To help unpack it all. Hello. I'm Brittany Luse, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. Heads up, this conversation was recorded just before the incident at the BAFTAs, where several members of the Sinners cast had a racial slur shouted at them from the audience by Tourette syndrome activist John Davidson. Davidson has since apologized, stating that his actions were not at all intended and instead are a result of his neurological condition. Attention has turned toward the British Academy Film Awards organization, who put together the award ceremony, and the BBC, who broadcast the award ceremony, and at least one utterance of the racial slur. There has been some tension between people who are fans of One Battle After Another and people who are fans of Sinners. I wonder, why do you think these movies have been discussed in such an oppositional way? There are 10 Best Picture nominees. Why do you think people are at each other's throats when it comes to these two films?
The reasons why someone might want to defend Sinners, well, it's had a sort of uphill battle for legitimacy, right? Out the gate, from that infamous Variety tweet and the New York Times post that occurred towards the end of the opening weekend that for some reason decided to highlight how Sinners had not yet achieved profitability, even though the movie hadn't been out for a week yet. Very different than how that outlet or other places have tweeted or written about other films. I think people had their guard up since then. Sinners was left off best of year-end lists from predominantly white publications like Rolling Stone and Variety again. We know that the Academy is a predominantly white institution with a history of racism. And we also know that Coogler has, as what we sort of skirted around, a sort of Marvel Stan-esque fan base. And when you combine all of those things, yeah, what you get is you get some fans that are very wound up for their favorite creator who made a movie that's really important to them that they feel has never been sort of treated fairly in the industry or by the trades. Like, none of this staunch defense felt or feels unfounded at heart, right?
Well, this pitting of the two films reminds me of La La Land, quote unquote, versus Moonlight, where, of course, you had Moonlight and which was a deeply Black film about a very specific Black queer experience. And then you had La La Land that got hung with the moniker of being a white film about jazz.
Not the wisest decision in my book, but yeah.
I also think because much like La La Land, trading in what was considered a Black topic like jazz, one battle after another, trading in Black revolutionaries, particularly Black women, and then as oppositional to Sinners, which very much projects Black women, and also equally like sexual terms, but terms that feel like that are on their own plane or definition, that it's almost easier to put them in opposition to each other because it feels like they're in some ways grappling with the same topics. In some ways, in terms of revolutionary politics, in one sense, it's a in one battle after another, it's a secret underground organization. In Sinners, it's within the economics of the South. And so because they are in some ways kind of fighting on the same turf, even though one has vampires and the other one doesn't, that it's become significantly easier in this case to kind of draw the battle line, so to speak.
I think because there isn't a sort of call to action in terms of supporting this movie, right? You had the La La Land versus Moonlight debate, which is vote for Moonlight, not La La Land. You have Oscars So White, which is please nominate more Black actors. But when people feel like this movie is being treated unfairly or not winning, they don't have any sort of specific recourse. So what happens? Well, Timothée Chalamet wins over Michael B. Jordan, and all of a sudden that's racist. One Battle Another wins over Sinners, and all of a sudden that's racist. K-pop Demon Hunters wins over Sinners, and all of a sudden that's racist. But I think, to what Robert was saying, a large part of this is because a lot of these movies, they trade in Blackness, right? Even Timothée Chalamet, it's not just that he won, it's that Marty Supreme was a movie that he promoted with a well-documented press tour that involved performing Blackness. And whether that performing of Blackness was genuine to him, that's something that's oft debated. It's true, right? He was collaborating with rappers. He's wearing Timberlands to mainstream award ceremonies. He's, promoting this whole hustle culture thing. And so even then, it's kind of like he's winning over this Black actor, even though his press tour and his campaign for this award was rooted in Blackness, right? One Battle Another is winning, even though the movie is rooted in Black revolutionaries or Black women. And so it feels to a lot of fans like this sort of slap in the face. And I think that's when things get particularly unhinged and vitriolic online.
I want to move to talking about One Battle After Another. I've seen people who are huge fans of Sinners and not feeling One Battle After Another level all sorts of accusations about what the aims of the film are or how it handles race or gender or sexuality. And I'll admit, even though I loved One Battle After Another, I really enjoyed the film, there were some places where I felt a little uneasy with some characterizations, even though overall I thought the project of, the story and the direction and the execution were extremely strong. I've seen some people insinuate that the only reason it's getting so many nominations is because of white liberal guilt. And also I've seen some people who are fans of One Battle After Another kind of shoo away legitimate critiques of the film that are coming from Black women, again, who are depicted in the film in kind of like an interesting kind of way that some people have taken legitimate issue with. A big critique of that film that I've seen is that its revolutionary politics are lacking, or it makes the Black revolutionaries actually in particular look incompetent. What do y'all make of that?
Oh, gosh, what do I make of this? I think, first of all, most of the criticism is about that first 30 to 45 minute prologue and has nothing to do with the rest of the movie.
For people who haven't seen the film, because also One Battle After Another is nowhere near as widely seen as Sinners was. Yeah. So I can't assume y'all have seen it. But yeah, the first 30 to 45 minutes is like a prologue that has to do specifically with Tiana Taylor's character, Perfidia Beverly Hills. And, she is this tough, smart, impulsive, brash character that is also in highly sexual situations that are also highly racialized. Yes. So without spoiling too much, that is, I think, a helpful way to set up what happens in that first 30 to 45 minutes.
The other 2 hours are, you know, the story that we've come to know, the Leonardo DiCaprio trying to get his daughter back. That's the part that has Benicio del Toro in it. That's when Regina Hall gets to shine a little bit more. And I think if we're talking about depictions of revolutionaries, the criticism that it is mocking revolutionaries is, I think, one way to read it. I choose to see the film as saying that revolutionaries don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfect people, but they can still be impactful, right? And their legacy can still matter. But if I think about the best depiction of a revolutionary in that movie, it is Benicio del Toro. It has nothing to do with the first 30 to 40 minutes. And so almost all the criticisms, I think, are about that first prologue, which I think is such a disservice to the actual craft of the movie that Paul Thomas Anderson has helmed.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And, you know, in terms of its revolutionary politics, does it push far enough, you know? Because I think one of the complaints has been that most of it's referring to is broad in scope, right? It doesn't specifically say, like, we're anti-ICE or something like that. Like, you know, you can infer it, but it doesn't actually say it. However, though, if you think about the type of film that it is at the level that it is, can anyone think of, I mean, you can think of independent films.
Sure.
But like an actual Hollywood studio putting that much money behind something that is like, you know, quote unquote revolutionary in its aims, is incredibly rare. Incredibly, like, you have to think of like Ishtar.
Take it back. And we also see what that did for Elaine May's career. Like,
yeah, you know, and so there are quote unquote levels to this, right?
Sure.
In terms of like, yeah, is it a screed that is just calling out names on a checklist? No, it's not. But is it doing something that is very rare at its budgetary level? Yes. And of course, that kind of criticism has leaped over into the criticism of the Black women characters, particularly Black women revolutionaries. And part of that, I think, stems from the fact that we don't have many films about Black women revolutionaries.
Fair.
Like, this is kind of it. There are a couple more, of course, but, you know, there aren't many. And so I feel like there has been, in terms of the kind of desire to, I don't want to maybe sanitize like these characters into being something that is something that could be put on a pedestal, I think is a flattening of history and the history of revolutionaries.
It kind of mimics life, right? Like, no one ever really wants to hear a bad thing about MLK. They don't want to hear about his sort of philandering or what have you, right? Because it sort of ruins this picture of this very positive character that has been somewhat sanitized. And even just this idea that civil disobedience is entirely peaceful is a sanitized idea, right? And I think that that's something that we do in actual history. And so, of course, it's something that we are sort of looking towards in terms of film depictions. And someone on Twitter had this great point that they believe that a lot of this backlash against One Battle is the result of backlash from the era of slave and antebellum films, where they feel like nowadays we can only champion representations of Black people if they were purely positive because of this sort of era of films where we were only slaves or trying to emancipate ourselves. And I think that that also plays a role or a part into it as well. But also, people have a really hard time with Black female characters that have sex, just more generally, no matter how you read it or how it's written.
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking about specifically with Perfidia Beverly Hill's character is like, you know, she, you know, I mean, this is a woman, she abandons her baby. She turns on her friends. You know, I really liked the film, but I still felt like her character wasn't handled perfectly. And also I have felt that some of the maybe harsher critiques of her character have been, to me, kind of revealing of some other sort of internal biases of some people who have had issue with it. It's like, well, is the issue this character or the film, or is the issue actually, you know, to your point, Nadir, like that you are uncomfortable with Black women who are, you know, more forward with their sexuality? Are you uncomfortable with Black women who are bad moms? And also, too, I mean, there's to me, a very clear point in the film where it's very obvious. Like, I mean, not to say that the film was unsubtle and hitting us over the head, but it made it extremely clear to me that Perfidia was going through some sort of postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. Like it would, like there's voiceover of her explaining how she feels.
Yes. I think that was very specifically written for a reason. And I think we, in addition to not having enough movies about Black women that are revolutionaries and in also, you know, not sort of having generous reactions to depictions of Black women that are sexual characters. I also think we don't have enough depictions or we don't talk enough societally about postpartum depression. And so I think that that also compounds a lot of people's reactions to Perfidia as a character. But I also think, in addition to it being very sort of explicitly written that she is suffering from severe postpartum depression, I also think it's very explicitly written that though she has consensual sex with her white partner, she also is coerced into sexual acts by someone who is a military officer who has a higher rank than her.
Yes.
And so all of these conversations about how she's over-sexualized and how she only entertains white men, you know, it's sort of negating this very important power imbalance and this really traumatic thing that she goes through. And I think partially because we don't actually see that sexual act because Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't show it to us. But I don't think we need to be shown in order to have some sort of sympathy for this character in that moment.
Yeah. And I think in terms of Perfidia and who she is and the complexity of who she is and the complexity of the situations that she's put in, it's in the writing, but it's in Teyana Taylor's performance, which I think in a lot of the critiques of the film has been underserved. I think her performance is absolutely phenomenal. And the only reason that Paul Thomas Anderson is able to kind of have that prologue be 35 minutes is because of her performance. Like that moment where she steps out of the motel and you can see he holds the camera on her face and she just gives that beat of disgust, right? It's so clear from her performance that in that moment and in the moment prior, she's been coerced into this situation, and there is a power imbalance. And so I think, that has been, just in terms of some of the critiques I've seen, that's been the most grating part. Because I agree. I do think there are components that could have been tightened, that could have been fleshed out. But I think a lot of the ways that people have been building the arguments against one battle after another, particularly in this depiction of Black women revolutionaries, has really ignored the agency that these actresses have.
Coming up.
Yes, she does some things that some people might consider unforgivable, but then it spends the next 2 hours begging the audience to still love her. It dedicates 2 hours of the movie saying, I gave you this really complicated Black woman. Do you think that you can still love her by the end of this?
More from Nadira and Robert after the break.
This message comes from Wise, the app for international people using money around the globe. You can send, spend, and receive in up to 40 currencies with only a few simple taps. Be smart. Get Wise. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com. T's and C's apply.
One of the things that I find so revolutionary about this movie, and a part of why I loved it after digesting it, seeing it twice in theaters, is it presents you this very complicated picture of a Black woman who I do believe has her heart in the right place and is trying her best, no matter what the sort of circumstances are. And yes, she does some things that some people might consider unforgivable, but then it spends the next 2 hours begging the audience to still love her. It dedicates 2 hours of the movie saying, I gave you this really complicated Black woman. Do you think that you can still love her by the end of this? And I think that is so heartwarming. Like, it makes me emotional to think about that. And there's nothing in the sort of final 2 hours that's that derogatory towards her. It's mostly characters like trying to understand her or being too afraid to explain what she did to her daughter because, they don't want to color this picture. It's really about protecting that character and her legacy and wanting the audience to still find her worthy of love and appreciation and respect. And I think that is such a a valiant effort for a movie to do and not something that I've necessarily seen before. And when I think about the things the movie is best at, that's something that jumps out to me.
The thing that has been puzzling to me about this is that, like, the most fervent fans of Sinners and the most willing, let's say, to go to bat for it online, to me, they're kind of emblematic of like a larger pattern of present day fandom. It's like, first of all, I mean, to your point, I could see how some fans might feel slighted by some of what they might see as like unfair treatment of a film like Sinners. But like, it's incredibly popular. Again, not just with audiences, but with critics. It's one of the highest grossing films of like the 2020s. And it's like one of the like highest grossing, original films that we've had, I think, like in years. I've seen super fans of Sinners say that they've gone to see the movie in theaters repeatedly 4, 5, 6, 7 times. But I haven't seen that same fervor catch on with regard to other Black films that have come out this year, like in the past year. And maybe I'm missing something, but why do y'all think the same energy around making sure that Sinners is properly recognized hasn't spread to other, for reasons having to do with like this being a Black film made by Black filmmakers? Why do you think that energy hadn't spread to other Black films that have come out this past year? Like, why do you think it's kind of funneled into this one project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that much of it has to do with the packaging and access. Like Sinners played in multiplexes, and something like On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, which I love, was a very limited release, right?
Yeah.
And so it's hard to become a fan of something. It's hard to support something if it's just not making it to you. And Sinners made it itself to people.
Very true.
And also the packaging, I think, as well. I mean, like Coogler, really at the beginning talking about how many different formats it was going to be in, right, is in a sense selling the film, not just as a film and not just as an event, but also as like art, right?
That video clip sold so many tickets. I can promise you.
It really did.
Yes, it sold so many. And so I think there is even more of a sense of like, we have to support this one because this isn't just a Black film. This is Black art. And so it has, I think, that higher kind of like chance of regard as opposed to other things.
That's a really, really, really good point that you made, Robert, that like, sometimes these films that honestly could be better than a lot or most or all of the films that are competing for Best Picture. Sometimes these films don't even hit the radar of many possible audiences because sometimes due to circumstances out of their control, they just are not properly marketed and they aren't able to connect with an audience.
I live in New York where you can see almost anything in a theater if you, plan right or if you look it up early enough, whether it's an indie theater.
Although even for the big movies, sometimes now, unless it's an award season, it's like you got 2 weeks.
I know it's a short period of time. But that's why I said if you plan properly, you could see almost anything. But if I think about friends who live in, the Midwest or in other places that aren't New York and LA, like you actually maybe have zero chance of seeing some of these better indie films of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Chicago. I'm born and raised in Chicago, and growing up, and it's the same thing now on the west side of the city. There was and there is still only one movie theater to service the entire west side of the city.
Wow.
And on the south side of the city, there's only 2 theaters. The majority of the theaters in Chicago are based on the north side of the city.
Yeah, let's fix that.
So it's difficult for me, but it's even more difficult for people, who are living on the west and south side of the city who probably have to take 2-3 buses in order to get to a film that's playing in a Cineplex.
Jeez. I didn't realize it was that deep. There's been so much chatter about which of these films is better. And which of these films is more moral, which I'm like, oh, those are 2 metrics that I'm like, can we throw these out when we're talking about movies? I think that we're losing the thread of why these movies like both resonated so deeply with audiences in the past year. I'd argue that 10, 20 years time, like both of these films will be remembered as like the films of the moment. What do you think each of these films is capturing about America today? Like, why do you think they're resonating? They both have resonated so deeply with audiences and critics.
I wrote a piece about Sinners and the metaphor. When it came out, at first, a lot of predominantly white critics simplified the metaphor to the vampires just being white people, which I don't think is true. I think if you look at the history of the time period and if you consider the fact that the Remnick main vampire character is Irish, and the Irish obviously as a demographic having a history similar to those of the Black diaspora in terms of oppression and civil war, I think you would understand that the movie is trying to skewer something else a lot more specific, which is white supremacy. Not necessarily whiteness as we've come to understand it, but the particular engine that continues to oppress people of color, or the engine that forces Irish people to assimilate into whiteness, right? And I think that One Battle After Another is another movie that I think the best thing it does, you can argue about the sort of black politics or revolutionary politics all day, but I think the best thing it does is it perfectly skewers white supremacy in this current day and age, and what white supremacists, what their values are, how they interact with each other, the sort of the weird moral ground that they stand on in their own point of view. And I think that's something that both of these movies are doing, even though they're set in two different time periods, that I think speaks very well to this era today or to this moment today. And I would like to think, or I would hope, that that's one of the main takeaways that watchers of those movies have when they finish, because it's something that both of those movies are doing pretty exquisitely, I would say.
I think they're both galvanizing works, right? I think, especially right now, of course, where we have ICE entering into cities, and then we have, in Chicago, we had the president try to force in the National Guard into the city, that the avenues in terms of fighting back right now, it almost feels so limiting or limited. But here are these two movies that are feature protagonists who are very clearly fighting back and are figuring out some way to rebel. And so, so I think what both films do is that they not only give a roadmap to that rebellion, but they also offer some semblance of hope. They offer some semblance of being able to, overcome whatever white supremacy or authoritarianism that is currently happening in their respective eras. And so, so I think that's the other way that it's really spoken to audiences is offering that kind of that galvanizing final scenes too, right? Where you have Chase Infinity's character joining the revolution, and then of course you have Michael B. Jordan gunning down racists with a machine, with a Tommy gun. And on high notes, I think that I think leave audiences with like I said, the hope or the confidence that they can also leave the theater and in some way replicate that feeling.
That's a really, really good point. There's like real optimism about forces of evil, whatever shape they take, being eradicated, or at least that you can get up to fight another day, in the case of, let's say, One Battle After Another. In thinking about battling white supremacy, having art that shows even a glimmer of hope, I imagine that absolutely would resonate with audiences on a deep level. Nadira, Robert, I have really enjoyed this conversation with the both of you. Thank you both so much. I had a blast.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having, yeah.
That was staff writer of culture at Slate, Nadira Goff, and associate editor at RogerEbert.com, Robert Daniels. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luse. Talk soon.
This message comes from Capella University. That spark you feel? That's your drive for more. Capella University's FlexPath learning format lets you earn your degree at your pace without putting life on pause. Learn more at capella.edu. This message comes from Odoo. How many streaming subscriptions do you have? Is it the same for your business? Avoid it by having all of your business on one platform. Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
This message comes from BetterHelp. International Women's Day is this March. Time to celebrate all women, the leaders, the caregivers, the hype friends, the how do you do it all types. Women deserve to be reminded how much they matter and that therapy offers a space to care for themselves. BetterHelp makes it simple by matching you with a qualified therapist based on your needs and preferences. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR for 10% off.